Welcome to Take 5, your 5-minute inspirational message from Solid Rock Drogheda. Over recent days, we've been looking at some of the greatest scientists in the world and how their deep faith enabled them to search God's creation and make so many discoveries which have been proved of benefit to us and of lasting value. And today we've come to the last of these, last in this series of scientists. And this one actually is different from the rest in the fact that he is still alive. His name is Francis Collins. And Francis Collins, he's done some amazing things. He identified the genes that are responsible for cystic fibrosis and for Huntington's disease, two horrible diseases that have affected people in the church that I pastor. And so really, the fact that all the modern treatments that are now being developed, and we pray to God one day a cure for these horrible conditions, it will be through the work of Francis Collins that is made possible. He's also, actually, you may have heard about him in the news recently, because he is the head of the National Institutes of Health in the United States. Which means you've all heard of Dr. Fauci, who's got so much to say about the coronavirus. Well, Francis Collins is Dr. Fauci's boss. In fact, whenever it all got very political a while back and some people were saying the president should sack Dr. Fauci, the president didn't have the power to sack Dr. Fauci. The only person who has the power to fire him is Francis Collins, as the foremost scientist in the United States of America today. But he's best known for overseeing a massive project called the Human Genome Project. And that's something that has completely mapped out human DNA. And this is vitally important, actually, because it's reckoned to be the greatest scientific project of our lifetimes. And most major medical advances in the future for cancer, heart disease, and so many other medical conditions, these treatments will be based on the work done by the Human Genome Project. And even, the technology that they developed and the computers that they developed to be as a part of that project. Because when you undertake any great scientific project, there's byproducts of it that new technology has to be developed as well. So, for example, back in the 1960s, when there was the race to put man on the moon, there were so many developments in computers and satellites and everything else that still benefit us today with our GPS systems and our computers and our smartphones and such like. And because of this Human Genome Project that Francis Collins oversaw for over 15 years, that all the supercomputers that were developed have been used today to dramatically boost carrying out tests both in America and around the world for COVID-19, and even helping develop the vaccines for it. So this is still impacting all of our lives. And one other thing about this Human Genome Project that I believe is tremendously significant is it has proved once and for all that there is no scientific basis whatsoever for racism. Because the Human Genome Project, by totally mapping out the human DNA, showed that there were absolutely no genetic differences between different human races coming from different parts of the world, different skin colors, whatever else. That while there are genetic differences in our ancestry and descent and families, not between races. So there is absolutely zero scientific evidence for the folly of racism. And I thank God that Francis Collins helped discover that. Now, Francis Collins, like a lot of scientists, began as an atheist, but he actually became a committed Christian, partly through his study of creation, that he began to see the hand of God at work. In fact, he wrote a book on human DNA, which is entitled The Language of God, because that's how he sees our DNA, as a language that God has written into our body and a plan for us to develop. But he became a committed Christian partly through his scientific study, but also he knew, and he'd been reading C.S. Lewis, and he knew that he had to take a step of faith that you couldn't just argue yourself into becoming a Christian by logic alone, that there has to be a step of faith. And so when he was wrestling with all this stuff as a young atheist doctor, who was beginning to understand that God was there through his scientific studies, he went for a vacation in the Cascade Mountains. And as he was up in those mountains, he saw a frozen waterfall and looked at that waterfall and thought it was the most beautiful thing that he had ever seen in his life. And he just there and then, he took a step of faith because he realized that only a glorious God could make something as beautiful as that glorious frozen waterfall. That was his step of faith, based on the evidence he had gathered as a scientist. And so today, I thank God for a man such as Francis Collins, who is a strong Christian faith and is also probably the leading scientist in our world today. We have nothing to fear as Christians from science. Science is our friend to help us discover God's universe, and thank God for men and women of faith who helped develop modern science. Join us again tomorrow for another Take 5, your 5-minute inspirational message from Solid Rock Drogheda.